Good evening, everyone, and welcome for those, and welcome Malka for joining us for the first time. So all the way from Eretz Yisrael, right? From Yerushalayim. So welcome. Okay. We did research. I did some research for.
How did you know my name?
The word gets around, but I just can't. I want to start.
Only for good things.
Yes, Baruch Hashem. So I'll just tell you, the class every week, we're going to divide the time. We're going to try to be finished today on time. Mazel tov. But what if? Okay, but just to respect everyone's time, we're going to divide the time into 4. Every week we divide the time into 4. We try to cover the parsha from 4 different angles. We use the method and the template of Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. In other words, we're going to make a simple overview of the parsha just to have clarity of all the details of the parsha. Then we're going to have remez. For us, remez every week, we're going to go into practical halacha. Something that we can walk away with today, tonight, with Shulchan Aruch, something, how to practical Jewish life in connection to the parsha. Number 3, we're going to share a story from a Hasidic Rebbe in connection to this week's parsha as a drush, as a inspiration from the parsha. And in the last segment, we're going to go into Sod, which is a little bit something from Hasidus on the parsha. Okay, so I want to introduce the parsha as follows. We've mentioned several times in the class, and it's always worth mentioning. It's worth mentioning every day in our mind, actually more than maybe once a day, which is God created the world for what reason? And the reason is, the Torah tells us, because He wanted to make this world into His home. In other words, He wasn't in the higher realms, in heaven, it wasn't God's home. I don't want to go into all the details, but He wanted this physical world to be His home. Home meaning a place where He could feel comfortable and revealed. The truth is... The bracha? Oh, the bracha. There you go, I got a reminder. For those who didn't yet have a chance today to say the bracha for Birchas HaTorah, so we start every week giving everyone an opportunity for those who didn't yet do it. So you could join in with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah. Yes?
Do we need a new one since it's new day?
Not really. If anyone said it in the morning, then it covers for the day. But if someone didn't have a chance in the morning, that's why we do it. We had a discussion once about it, and we decided we're going to ask the Rabbanim. We did, and we came back with the answer that we should do that for those who didn't have the opportunity to do it in the morning. Yes?
We can't do it here perhaps, but if you were at home, it was proper to wash your hands, right, before you...
Yeah, the truth is, the regular, what we're doing when we say the bracha at night is doing it a little bit out of order. But if someone would be doing it according to the order, they'd wake up in the morning, wash their hands, say the brachas, and one of those brachas would be for the Torah. But we give an opportunity every week for if anybody didn't have a chance here. Okay, so let's go back. So Hashem created this world so it should be His home.
That's a nice thought.
That what?
It's a nice thought.
Just that.
What you just said about this is God's here.
Yeah, God's home, exactly. He's here, but the problem is He's not at home. What does it mean to be at home? When you're at home, you can feel comfortable to get undressed. God is in this world, but He's very much dressed. He's very much covered over. What does it mean to be undressed? Undressed means to be revealed.
Right.
For God's presence to be revealed. And He leaves that up to us to sort of undress Him. How do you undress Him? By taking every article, every item of this world and connecting it to a godly purpose. We're undressing the godliness that's within it. This is really the underlying message of every parsha. Now, originally when the world was created, it was ready to be God's home. The problem is, with the wrongdoing of man and mankind, it says the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence, was more and more distant and pushed away from this reality, from this physical world. But then, Avram Avinu, Abraham, the first Jews, started a trend. What was his trend? The opposite. To bring Hashem's presence back down here. The 7th, starting from Abraham, if we count 7 generations, is Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. He accomplished this by bringing down the Torah, but that still was not enough. Because bringing down the Torah was still from God's part. It wasn't yet people, human beings, Jewish people, creating His home. And that starts in this week's Parsha. He turns this week's Parsha The name of this week's parsha is Terumah. Terumah, which means offering, gift, contribution, donation, that the people now should be contributing and donating from their own wealth, their own belongings, their own materials to create a home for Hashem. And that's this week's parsha from the beginning till the end. And it starts like this. It starts with Moshe telling, or it tells actually God telling Moshe to tell the Jewish people, Vayikhu li Terumah, take for me donations. Listen to that word. It says Vayikhu, take. It should have said you should give, no? Why did it say take? Our Chachamim, our sages, point something out here very beautiful. They say the Jewish people were so eager and so willing to give that you didn't have to give them a mitzvah to give. You just had to give a mitzvah to take it. Because on their part, it was all ready to go. You understand? It was actually set aside and ready to be used for a godly purpose. They were just waiting for people to come, those who were appointed, those like the treasurers, you might want to call them, who would come and collect the money. Like a meshulach, who comes to collect for tzedakah. That's what was happening.
Doesn't it say only if it's in your heart?
Yeah, it's true. That shows that the people were it was in their heart to give it. They didn't have to be told to give it. They wanted to give it.
At that time, it was already the Beit HaMikdash, they started building.
No, this is before even they had any material to build, so they're being told to give the material to build. I just want to add one beautiful footnote. It's a beautiful footnote because we're going to have to mention this in coming weeks anyways, which is that ultimately this parsha, according to many of the Mefarshim, according to many of the commentaries, it's out of order. Meaning, it's, when I say out of order, obviously it's in the order, but it's out of this chronological order. That's because this happened after the golden calf, after the Egel Hazav. And just like in the golden calf, the people gave, obviously without being told. They gave on their own accord in order to make up for it, in order to do teshuvah, in order to correct the wrongdoing of giving voluntarily. They also had to give voluntarily. The mitzvah, therefore, wasn't that they should give because they wanted to give. The mitzvah was that we should take. What should we take? 15 materials. The Torah, gold, silver, copper, different forms of wool, linen, of precious stones, and so on, and as well as cedar wood or acacia wood. I say cedar and acacia because it's an interesting thing, and I don't exactly know the answer. I have to do some research on this. But I noticed from different translations of different chumashim, when they translate it to English, the words atzei shittim, some say cedar, some say acacia. Does anybody know if they're the same family or anything? Okay, I have to.
Cedars, most of they come from Lebanon. We're saying how.
Yeah, Lebanon, right?
Yeah.
Eretz Lebanon.
Yes, that. This is the cedars.
Right. So I'll tell you an interesting thing. Rashi has a question.
Excuse me, I don't think they're the same thing, cedar and acacia.
I know, so I don't know why in their translation you'll notice that in the English chumashim, most people translate as acacia. But then when the Rashi uses the word arazim, so I guess that prompts people to think about cedar wood. But I have to look into it because it's very interesting. And it could be it's a simple answer, but that's just something I've been noticing. Acacia, cedar, cedar, acacia. Almost like interchangeable, but they're not. Okay, something to think about. Rashi has a problem. Very good. So they had gold with them in the desert. Why do they have gold? Because remember, they took from the Egyptians a lot of gold and silver. Also, all these other precious things they took from, remember after the splitting of the sea, so they got a lot of biza, a lot of loot from what was left from the Egyptians. But the simple question is, how do you have trees? All these things make sense, right? That you should have gold, silver, wool, copper, linen, these things. In fact, linen is an interesting thing. We know that Egypt had a lot of flax. Linen comes from flax. So it sort of makes sense that those leaving Egypt would have a lot of linen. But how do you have wood?
There's no wood in this place?
And it's a desert, right? So Rashi tells us a beautiful thing. What's that? What do you think?
Can do anything.
Oh, God can do anything, but he ultimately, remember, the mitzvah was that you should take it, meaning it was ready to be given. So the Jews had this wood. Why do they have wood if they're walking in the desert? So this is what he answers. Listen to this. It's a fascinating background. He says, 210 years earlier. What happened 210? A little more than 210 years earlier. Everyone found out, oh, Yosef is in Mitzrayim. Joseph, the lost brother, is in Egypt. So he sent wagons to go get his father Yaakov from Israel, Eretz Yisrael, then it was Canaan, and bring him down to Egypt. Right? Rashi tells us, he quotes from a Medrash, Yaakov knew prophetically, he foresaw that there's going to come a time that his children will be building a Mishkan, a home for Hashem. He took with him trees. Listen, he took with him trees down to Egypt. So throughout all the years that the Jewish people are working, back-breaking labor, and bitter years and dark years, they always had trees reminding them, we're going to get out of here, and we're going to build a home for Hashem from these woods. This is the midrashic explanation of how they had trees. So throughout all the years, they knew we're going to build a home for Hashem, and our father, our grandfather, great-grandfather, Yaakov, brought these trees here. And he told us that when we leave Egypt, we should take the trees with us. And that's what they did. Interesting piece of the puzzle that explains to us how on the people's part, on the Jewish people's part, it was all ready to be given. It was just now that they needed someone to knock on the door and say, okay, now it's time to give it because we're collecting for the Mishkan. So I'm going to make a brief overview of the items, the vessels, the kalim, that's the word in Hebrew, the vessels that were spoken about, that are spoken about in this week's Torah portion. And if you could please follow along, this way we'll be able to go through them. The first one is the Aron. It's mentioned the first because from all the vessels, it's the holiest. The Aron is the ark, actually a box, literally a box. In it would be the tablets, the two tablets, as well as a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll.
Which two tablets? The broken ones?
Both.
Both.
Eventually both. But, we call this the Aron Kodesh because the Sefer Torah is in here sort of copying the same idea that we call the Aron, the ark, in the Mishkan, and this is how it was. It was gold in the outside, gold in the inside, wood in the middle. If you see, that's the diagram that you have printed on the first page. Above this Aron, above this box, were the Kruvim. The Kruvim were these two images of angels with faces of children that was above the Aron. The reason why it was there, Rashi tells us, is that we should always remember how God loves us like children. The love God has for us is like his children. Keep that in mind because we're going to get back to that in the very end of today's class.
But it's very troubling.
Why is it troubling?
You have two idols, if you want to call them that.
But I don't want to call it.
Wait a minute. And God spoke from between them. So if that actually happened, where do you think, you don't think the people would bow down and worship those two cherubim?
First of all, you should know.
It's all dangerous.
You know something? The world is a dangerous world. Yeah. Now, actually, I don't mean that in a joking way. I mean that in a serious way. That sometimes, but that's exactly what Hashem wants us to know. That I'm telling you to make this, and I'm telling you to make this as an image, but obviously not as an image that in any way takes away from Hashem. So it's almost like if it's made for the Aron, if it's made for a holy purpose, then it's a holy purpose, and there's no idle thoughts.
Yeah, but now you're telling these same people is the ones that made the golden calf.
Yeah.
So now you make two golden figures, you put it on, the holiest thing in Judaism, and the voice of God comes out of there. Then you tell them, don't bow down to this.
Maybe it's purposeful.
I'm sure that somebody's got an
If I
answer
could
to that.
say something,
But
Yeah.
it's always bothered me though.
I think it's purposeful to say, now that I've revealed myself on Mount Sinai, you could make an artistic statue of the likeness of an angel and realize that it's just for decoration. We're not forbidden.
Instead of going into and I think you're touching on something very good, Moshe, because immediately after the event of the Ten Commandments and the revelation at Har Sinai, immediately after it says, don't make images, right? So Rashi there explains how what Hashem is warning at that point was not to make images the like of which is in the Mishkan. In other words, the only place where you could make such an image is in the Mishkan. So it's addressing exactly what's bothering you. Yes?
Two comments. One, the first is that angels were messengers from God. So if you're looking at an angel, where is it coming from? So
But you have to remember, the only thing, you're right, but a person has to be conscious of that.
well, we do it
In other words, a person could,
some degree of
Yeah.
consciousness. I mean, and the other thing is the difference between acacia and cedar.
oh, please.
Acacia is a very, very strong wood and would be very good for the tabernacle, whereas cedar is a much softer wood. So acacia would be a very, very good for the wood.
No, it's written that it was very strong wood, that Atzei Shittim was very strong. So it makes sense.
Cedar is not.
It's not. Okay, so then,
That's it.
but then you'll know, I guess, I sort of understand where the mistake happened, but I'm not sure how, because Rashi does say that what Yaakov brought down with him to Egypt is arazim. That's the word he uses. Arazim is usually translated as cedar. I think that's where I'm not sure. But it seems like most places do translate acacia, so I'm.
Acacia makes a lot more sense than cedar.
Okay, moving along. Yeah, I appreciate that. Moving along to the next vessel, the next item of the Mishkan was the shulchan, the table. What kind of table? It was a table for the showbread, for the lechem hapanim, that was changed every single week. It was this very significant and special bread, and interesting looking bread, as you see on the top of page 2, which was eaten by the Kohanim, by those who did the service.
Was it matzah?
They actually were not, you're right, they were unleavened.
Unleavened, that'd
Oh,
be matzah.
they were more like matzah. But they were thicker, obviously. Yeah, and the shape was very interesting. And this is what was put onto this shulchan, this table. It had like these 6 shelves on this side, 6 shelves on that side. In fact, some people say that the reason why every Shabbos, when we eat challah, so some people, you braid the challah, but there are several types of braids. Some do a 3 braid and some do a 6 braid. Correct? Some people say that the reason why they specifically do a 6 braid challah is because if you have 6 and 6, it's 12, representing the lechem hapanim, the showbread that's introduced in this week's parsha, which was changed every single Shabbos. Interesting. Okay, moving along, we have the menorah that was lit every day in the Mishkan, the candelabrum, full of oil that it would be lit while it's still day, but it would light throughout the night. The next part we start learning, we stop speaking about the vessels, and we go into the coverings, these wool coverings that would be over the Mishkan. Then we're going back to the walls with the acacia wood. See on top of page 3, it actually translates it as acacia wood. And then the Torah starts telling us about the arrangement of these vessels and the furnishing where everything would belong. We are then introduced to the copper altar, the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, upon which this altar was called the outer altar, because there were 2 Mizbeches, 2 altars in the Mishkan. One that was outside of the actual Mishkan in the Chutzner, in the courtyard, and the other one that was inside. The one that was inside we're going to learn about next week. And that's where the spices, the incense spices, were brought every day. Whereas the copper altar was where the animal offerings were brought, and that was outside in the courtyard, and the parsha concludes with telling us about the courtyard. Now, let's move on to the second segment. Now that we have a sort of an overview of what the parsha speaks about, let's move on to the second segment. The second segment of the class every week, we like to go into halacha, to practical Jewish life that we connect from the parsha and that we learn from the parsha. This week's halacha, we're going to be going through really a complete siman, a complete chapter of Shulchan Aruch, of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, all on the mitzvah of tzedakah. Typically, someone, we hear the word mitzvah, almost it's synonymous with tzedakah, right? Someone, you did a mitzvah. In fact, every time it says in Gemara that a certain person went to go do a mitzvah, when I say Gemara, I mean I think mainly in Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, it says, let's say, about this rabbi, he went to go do a mitzvah. We know that it always means that they're going to do tzedakah. That's like the rule. Mitzvah and tzedakah are like interchangeable. But what's interesting is that there are actually laws to tzedakah. It's not just a beautiful thing. It's not just whenever you could, just do it. There are actually halachas that applies to all of us about this mitzvah. So let's try to go through it. I try to divide it in a way that would be able to, go through topic by topic. The beginning of the halachas are actually not so much about what to do, but more about instilling within us the understanding of how significant and how important this mitzvah is, how great it is. Whenever you see 3 dots in today's reading, it's going to be where the halacha brings a source from a pasuk. So it would have been a lot longer, but every time it says, as it's written, and it brings a verse to back it up, I took it out not because, God forbid to say it's not important, it's just that I thought we would be able to get more in if we do it this way. So it is a positive mitzvah to give charity to poor Jews. Whoever sees a poor man requesting help and turns away from him without giving him charity violates a negative mitzvah. And then it goes further. It says, charity is the sign of the descendants of our patriarch Avram. Now, before I go further, I have something later that I brought here from Shulchan Aruch, but I want to stop here to say it. It actually says like this. If someone shows themselves, demonstrates to be someone who doesn't give tzedakah sort of at all, doesn't show a heart towards the poor, this is what it says in halacha. We start doubting if they're Jewish. Can you imagine? We start doubting their yichus. It's a very harsh thing, but that's what's written. In other words, if someone, now what does that mean? It's not so clear. What does that mean? Because when do you start saying it's a tendency? But in any case, that's what it's written. That's what's written in Shulchan Aruch, and this is
Who's deciding this?
for the
Who says that he's not Jewish? Or that
Shulchan
he's
Aruch
not-
says. So who would say it? You're
The
saying.
court? Is the court
I'm
saying
assuming
that?
probably the Beis Din, yeah.
Okay.
Beis Din would start saying that there's a chashash. Chashash means there's a doubt.
There's a doubt. But then we have different kinds of charity. Charity is not always money. It could be a smile, a handshake, a word of encouragement.
Correct. And we're going to spell that out today. We're going to spell that out in the halachas, meaning whatever I prepared on this today. And I think at the end of today, you'll see that if all these forms of tzedakah is one that someone doesn't do or runs away from, that's when this...
But it's interesting. Somebody who doesn't keep the Shabbos, is there a doubt that he's Jewish?
No.
Then why is there a doubt here?
Because this is something sort of like in the DNA. It's supposed to be in the blood, in our blood, starting from Avram.
Yeah.
To be, exactly. To be a giver, to be charitable, or to be maybe it's even deeper than that. Maybe it's a sensitivity towards others. And then it continues. It says, "The throne of Israel, meaning the people of Israel and our glory, will not be established, and the true faith will not stand except through charity. Great is the one who gives charity more than all the sacrifices. Israel will not be redeemed except through charity." Now, I chose to learn about these halachas today because ultimately the name of the parsha is Terumah, which is contributions and donations. Now, halacha then continues to say something that sometimes I think we all naturally have these thoughts that come into our mind, which is we sort of like try to budget in the tzedakah. Try to say, well, if I'm going to give and give and give, what's going to be? A person will never become poor because of giving tzedakah. Nor will any evil or damage come because of charity. Whoever shows mercy will have mercy shown towards him. We still didn't yet get to halachas of what to do and not to do and how to do. We're still on the road there by establishing how great this mitzvah is. The next thing, before we get to the detailed halachas, the next paragraph, which is number 3, is what I put under the title motivations. That's the way I think of it. Obviously, it doesn't say that in Shulchan Aruch, but it says things that a person should consider, things that a person should contemplate on and almost meditate on in order to push us to give tzedakah. Okay, I think it goes through 2 or 3 things. A person should contemplate on the fact that at every moment he asks God for his livelihood. In other words, we're really all asking for tzedakah. We might not be asking from a fellow human being. We're asking from Hashem to give us life, to give us health, to give us sustenance, for us, for our family. So ultimately, we are all asking. I mean, not to use the word in a derogatory way, but we are all schnorrers. Schnorrers meaning we are all beggars. We're just begging from Hashem. Just as he requests that the Holy One, blessed be he, hears his cry, so too should he hear the cry of the poor. So that's the first meditation, the first motivation of giving tzedakah is that, listen, I could very much relate to this guy because I'm also always asking. I'm also always asking that everything should be good with me and my family, with health and parnasa. So the person who's now asking me, I should feel for them too. That's the first. That sits well?
So it's like schnorr.
You know, it's like, I use that word term because sometimes when we see someone asking, all of our Yitzhahara, our mind, wants us to say, a schnorrer. Then we remember, wait, we are all schnorrers because we're all asking from Hashem. You don't like the term, right?
Yeah, it's a good term because
I
Bora
like
part
the
is called.
schnorrers. It's not when asking from Hashem to help us, but the schnorring is schnorring.
I know. When I say schnorrer, I'm trying to put in perspective to say that we are all in need of help, and we turn to Hashem for that help. So just like we're turning to God for that help, this fellow human being is asking me for help. This Jew is asking me for help. I have to answer them just like I want Hashem to answer me. By the way, this is a point that I've mentioned several times in the past. Therefore, it is considered very special that before we go to daven in the morning, every day, besides Shabbos and Yom Tov, that we give tzedakah, even a little bit.
It's a push.
A pushka, exactly. We give tzedakah.
What is a little bit? Like, you know,
Give how much
the
we can.
goyim in church, they're supposed to give 10%. Is there a percentage, or is it just...
So we're going to see. I brought on that. We're going to actually get to that, okay? So I'm happy you asked. So let's continue. We're on top of the page 5. He should also contemplate on the fact that the wheel of fortune turns constantly, and ultimately either he, his children, or his grandchildren will need to receive charity. That's a very difficult thing to think about. But the fact is, we look at someone else asking, and we have to remember, we're very blessed that we're not in that position. But as they say, the galgal ha'chayzer hu ba'olam, it's a turning wheel. It's always turning. And in Yiddish, there's also an expression, the reder drein. In other words, the dreitzich. It's always turning. So sometimes we feel on top, but we have to recognize that we're blessed to be in that spot, temporarily. And therefore, we should always feel the plight of somebody else. And then it continues, it says, a person should not think, how can I reduce my wealth by giving it to the poor? He must realize that the money is not his, but rather a trust granted to him in order to carry out the will of the one who entrusted it to him. Obviously, to fulfill what Hashem wants us to do with our money. This is the portion which he will ultimately receive for all his labor in this world. In other words, already allotted how much we will get, and tzedakah is beyond that. So we shouldn't be so calculated and so concerned. And I hope in the way I'm saying it that I think it's only natural that these are the thoughts that come into our mind. When it comes to tzedakah, we start thinking, but really, could I afford it? We have to realize that the money is entrusted to us, that we do with it the right things. And the right thing is what Hashem wants us to do with our money, which is first and foremost to help poor Jews in need.
And also, Hashem gives each one from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah a certain amount. And that's it.
Exactly. And we've mentioned once in the past that tzedakah is not counted in that. In other words, we're going to get what we have to get.
Right.
And the tzedakah that we give doesn't get taken away from our budget. Listen, it takes it's true. We have to remind ourselves this idea very often, constantly. But this is what the Torah tells us. Okay, now let's get to the practical halachas, and we're going to get to Glenn's question in just a few minutes. It's not me, right? Okay. Who has to give tzedakah? Every person is obligated to give tzedakah according to his capabilities. Even if he is able to give only a small amount, he should not hold himself back, because his small amount is as important as the rich man's large amount. And then it goes further. I'm not going to read inside, but it brings in a description, actually, of the way it is with karbanos, with sacrifices. We see that when the Torah speaks about a very rich sacrifice or very meager sacrifice, a poor sacrifice, it always uses the same term, reach nechoyach l'Hashem, a pleasant smell, a pleasant offering to Hashem. And our sages read that and they say, wow, look, it could be so big, it could be so small, but what's the underlying thing? What's the common denominator? That it's being done for Hashem. So if we're giving tzedakah, as long as we're doing it according to our capabilities, we don't have to measure ourselves based on anyone else. That's the fact. We have to measure ourselves based on ourselves. Now let's go to what is the amount of tzedakah that we could expect from ourselves to give. So we're going to do two things here. So before, again, I'm doing one more thing before we get to your point, Glenn. We're going to do two things. Number one, the Torah does describe that when someone comes to us for help, we're supposed to give them what they need. What they need. So whatever that person needs, we're supposed to give them. Sometimes we're not able to, but also there's something else here. And it's a very interesting thing, and you could try to analyze this in halacha, but this is what halacha says. It says, how much should one give to a poor person? Enough to meet all his needs. However, this applies to a poor man who receives charity in secret. That means if someone comes to us in secret and still sort of living a lifestyle and still very ashamed that they lost money or that they're in need, then we have to give them whatever we are able to get them back on their feet. However, a poor man, I'm sure it's about on page 5, but a poor man who goes around collecting door to door, one gives him a small donation according to his standing. What's a small donation? So I guess the first answer to your question is according to his standing. Every one of us, whatever is considered small, to give each person. And then he says, at least he should be given in the entire city. So I don't know how you do that, but apparently we're supposed to give enough that this person overall should have enough bread and food for 2 meals each day and a place to sleep.
How long?
Until they're able to get back on their own feet.
Could be 6 months, it could be.
Yeah, it's true.
I've never seen it. Have you ever seen it happen?
That what?
Where anybody gives that kind of charity?
No, what it's saying is, no, of course it happens. It happens because we're saying here is throughout the city, you get it? Someone comes to Boca Raton, they should be able to collect enough money that they'll be able to eat 2 meals and have a place to stay.
That's what welfare is for.
Yeah, it's true, but not everybody's able to get on that. But the truth is, welfare doesn't take away from our mitzvah.
Yeah.
In other words, the welfare is on the government. We still have a mitzvah that we have to do, which is to help them.
In my lifetime, I've
That's
never
true.
seen that happen.
But the welfare comes from tax money, so. I mean,
It's still not tzedakah. It's still not tzedakah. It's still not tzedakah. It's not.
So Rabbi, is there a difference, for instance, in you bring kosher meals to certain people at Century Village, is it because you bring in a kosher meal or because they need a meal?
Some and some.
Okay.
I mean, you're asking me personally why in my case. For me, it's some. Actually, it's mostly because for people to make it easier for people who would have a hard time getting it themselves. And that's one of the forms of giving tzedakah, is not only giving money, but giving a meal ready to go.
So you have to support the Meals on Wheels. We have this.
And the rabbi,
I do have a program like that.
We have this.
he has his own program.
Oh, okay.
I have my own meals. It's not Meals on Wheels, but it's similar.
It's like
But I do agree. Listen.
What about
Chariots on fire.
Chariots of fire, exactly. Okay, but we're still not, I think you had a question, right? But we'll get in a second, but I just want to get to one more point, which is, here we're talking about, that was about the receiver. We're trying to fill what they need. Now we're talking about budgeting tzedakah, in other words, how much percentage to give. That was Glenn's question. So the Torah does mention, obviously, the idea of meiser. Aser, to give a tithing, 10%. So let's see how 10% works. Okay? Do you count the principal? Do you count the profit? What do you count in 10%? So it's clear in halacha, but this what we're reading here is Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, so it's a little bit shorter, but it should cover your question. How much charity should a person give? In other words, in total. In total, from all the poor people that come to ask, how much should be our total of giving? The first year, what does it mean the first year? The first year is of a person's business, 1/10 of the principal. Afterwards, one should give 1/10 of the profit one makes each year, after deducting his household expenses. By the way, I noticed in Halacha there's a debate if that quote actually is there or not. Do you deduct your household expenses, yes or no? There are two opinions in that. But in any case, I put it in because in the Shulchan Aruch that I was using, it did say it there. So after deducting the household expenses, then we take 10% and give it to tzedakah. This is an average measure. The most desirable way of performing the mitzvah is to give 1/5, which is 20% of the principal of the first year, and then 1/5 each year from the profit. A person should not give away more than 1/5. Why not? Because then they themselves might end up, if they're going to give too much. So we said before, you won't lose, but if you're going to go give even beyond what the Torah tells us to give, then we might actually have to put ourselves in a situation that we will need tzedakah. So we have to go according to the Torah guidelines, which is not more than 20%.
But you have in mind it's with more than one organization, you want to give to this cause, that cause, doesn't make.
Your point right now is something that we're going to get to in just a second. In this same thing, no, because I learned something today that I never saw these words before. And I've learned this halacha before, but it never popped out. Sometimes you could read it, but then it becomes applicable in your life. And you're like, oh, I never noticed that. And this, I'm going to about to get that in a second. So before I get to that, there's one more point, which is all these restrictions of 20% is only during a person's lifetime. But after a person passes away, they're allowed to give their charity to more than 20%.
But if you're giving a mitzvah to do a tzedakah anyway, whether you do 1% or 20%.
Okay.
So is it looked upon?
So here's
if you don't do the 10%?
There are two mitzvahs really here. There's a mitzvah of tzedakah and there's a mitzvah of meiser. Tzedakah we're giving at every time. Meiser, tithing, is another mitzvah.
Okay.
And they're both important mitzvahs. We can't. I'm not saying to say that they're two, therefore to make one weaker. All I'm saying is there are two things we have to do. We have to give tzedakah. We also have to give a tithing. The amount of tzedakah we should give in total should be 1/10 of our earnings. And here's the point that I wanted to get to that's going to address your thing. One should not use one's tithes. In other words, the meiser should not be used to perform a mitzvah. In other words, to donate candles to the shul or to perform other mitzvahs. Rather, they should be given to the poor people. In other words, it's very interesting. I didn't realize that the meiser that we give, you would say, if I get, a meiser I'll give to an organization or give to a shul or something. Now, I don't want to take away from money that be given to a shul. Trust me, it's not my point. But it just popped out at me today while I was preparing that it says clearly that the tithing, in other words, this strict 10%, we should try to make sure goes directly to people in need. And performing mitzvahs like buying books for the shul, buying a Torah for the shul, or other mitzvahs like that, is what should be given beyond the 10%. But the 10%, we should make sure that 10% of our earnings or of our profit, however you calculate it, should be given to poor people. Yes, Paul.
So what about supporting rabbis that do kiruv with people that are spiritually poor? Would they be considered?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I don't know the answer. I only have the words of the...
Like supporting yeshiva.
Exactly. I only have the words of the Shulchan Aruch, but I think your question would be, I'll do some research. Hopefully by next week I'll have an answer for that. Okay? But it's, in other words, if I could elaborate a little on your question, if you don't mind, which is, his question basically is like this. Could we also consider people who are spiritually poor, right? That's what it is. Some people, they might not be physically poor. They can be very wealthy in the bank account, but, spiritually, when I mean spiritually, Jewish education, the connection to Yiddishkeit, might be very poor. So maybe the 10% is allowed to go to also that a case like that. In other words, we're not looking for luxury and adding books onto the shelf. We're talking about basic needs in terms of Judaism, Yiddishkeit, for people who are beginners. Am I touching on you? So if it's saying here that the 10% we should make sure it goes to the poor. Maybe we could include in those 10% also, not only physically poor, but also spiritually poor. It's a creative thing, and when I say creative, I don't mean to, I'm saying it's very likely that the answer is yes, I don't know. But I'm going to try to get back.
To reach out the Jewish soul,
Yeah, exactly.
then it should.
How do you calculate, like, volunteering and doing?
So that's, listen, those are good things, those are chesed, but that doesn't, not part of our monetary obligation. We have an obligation of letting go of our money.
If I take a day off, I make $100 a day or something, and I take a day off and work for a charity and help a charity, I can't consider that one,
It's a very,
1/5 of my,
you know, something, you're making me really think, because, because then I would say my whole life I'm doing charity. But, and then, I don't know, but I actually think that the mitzvah of giving is not just giving time. That's something else. In other words, it's a nice thing, it's an important thing, but that doesn't take away from the 10% that you did earn during the days that you did work.
but you couldn't earn that day. 'cause
Okay,
you
true,
couldn't-
but I don't think that's considered tzedakah. It's almost like,
I've heard differently, but okay.
no, so show me where.
My wife.
Yeah, but she's not here?
No, but again, I'm not knocking the idea. I hope you realize,
One
Moshe.
is a mitzvah and the other.
It's tzedakah. In other words, you could do that. Well, we're saying tzedakah. It shouldn't. My point is like this. We take off days for Shabbos, for Yom Tov, for other mitzvahs too. So we take off days for mitzvahs helping someone else. But that's not necessarily tzedakah. You get it? I think your wife and I might agree here that it's obviously a very important mitzvah. We should take off work to help someone else out. But it doesn't go into the money, into the 10% that we're talking about here, or into the money, into mitzvah of actually giving, contribution, donation in terms of monetary giving.
So we speak about mitzvah is to give hard cash.
No, tzedakah.
Tzedakah means.
Yeah.
Tzedakah.
Hard cash or food.
Or food.
But then Don did mention something else before that we're going to get to now, that there's something, it's not cash, it's not food, but it's still tzedakah. Yes?
The tithe of 10% is very, very important, actually. When you give a 10% of your earnings, then Hashem will give you that amount.
Actually, it's very interesting you say that. The
Hashem
Gemara.
will give you that amount. It's very, very important to do that. I know that we try very hard to do that. And we know a couple of families, because we know we live in Yerushalayim, so we know a couple of families who really, really benefit from it, and we benefit from that, ourselves. So,
I'll just tell you, I'll make this point by sharing a story.
Very medactic on doing that, and so is my husband.
So I'll tell you that the Gemara says that there was a young boy. He was the son of Rish Lakish. He's a great sage in the Gemara. And his uncle once asked him, what did you learn in school today? So he said he learned about the mitzvah of giving meiser. And it says in the pasuk, aser asren. It says, aser to aser. A tithing, you should give a tithing. So he said, so you learned it in school today. Why does it say it twice? It's almost like sounds poetic, right? Mm-hmm. Tithing, you should give a tithing. You should have just said, give a tithing. Mm-hmm. So the young boy says, no. The word aser also means to become rich. He says, give a tithing so you should become rich.
Right. You give a 10%, so you yourself.
So
you will have more.
Just a second. So Rabbi Yochanan, the uncle, turned to him and said, really? How do you know that? How do you know that if you give 10th, you'll become rich? So the Gemara quotes a little boy, called him a Yanuka, a very wise boy, who told his uncle, he says, you want to know how I know that if you give a tithing, you become rich? Try it out. That's what he told him. He said, try it out, you'll see. So, now let's go further. So, number 7, anyone who gives tzedakah to a poor person in an unfriendly manner and downcast-faced, even if he gave him 1,000 gold pieces, loses his merit. Not only that, he also transgresses your heart shall not be grieved when giving the money. Rather, one need to give him in a pleasant manner. This is what I'm getting to. We're going to get into this now. This is where the point that Don was making before, that it's not all about the money. It's about the way it's given. And since it's about the way it's given, sometimes it's not even about the money at all. It's about what we say and the face we show. It should be given with happiness, sharing his suffering with him. He should speak to him words of consolation. The halacha then continues. It is forbidden to turn away a poor man who asks for a gift empty-handed, even if all you give him is a dried fig. In the last paragraph of page 6, if you have nothing to give him, console him with words. It is forbidden to rebuke harshly a poor person or raise one's voice against him, for his heart is broken and humble. And see, it is written, a broken and contrite heart God will not despise. So basically the idea is that even if we don't have money, even if we don't have actual, something of monetary giving to give someone who's in need, financial help, a good word in that case would be considered the tzedakah. Now you can't put that either part of the 10%. But the tzedakah, when someone comes and asks us for help, if we don't have money to help them, is to share in their pain by giving them a good word, encouraging them, motivating them, and uplifting them.
I would give them a meal.
If we could, I'm saying, assuming someone meets you in the street one day, and you're, whatever, it's not in a position that you're able to give him. However you could explain it. I'm sure there are positions that way. That you're somewhere where you cannot, you're not in the position to actually give them. If I imagine, sometimes, this is how you could do tzedakah on Shabbos. Exactly. If someone asks us for help on Shabbos, we obviously don't have money to give them on Shabbos, but we have a good word to tell them.
No.
And the good word is considered the tzedakah at that moment.
They have some shluchim who are going around from shul to shul, from city to city, to show you all kind of letters, and you don't know it's real or fake. Somebody's in trouble, some yeshiva's closing down, give me the money.
It's true. So what Meir is talking about is that, if you go around in shuls, you'll see there's a lot. People will come with a letter that says, I'm coming from Yerushalayim, I'm coming from Bnei Brak, I'm coming from, Cincinnati, or whatever. And it's a letter that says, this is what I'm collecting for. Usually it's signed by someone. Sometimes you'll look at it, you'll see that it's maybe outdated, it's very old, or something like that. So the truth is, on our part, we have to do our part and give. Really. We're not supposed to question. We're supposed to give. On their part, yes, and I took it out of Shulchan Aruch because I felt that it wasn't important to share in our class, but on their part, it's a very harsh thing for someone who makes believe to need money and gathers money in that way and collects money in that way. In fact, I'll just share with you what halacha says, that a person who makes believe to be in need and goes around collecting, the words that Shulchan Aruch uses is that they will not leave this world before they actually do need it. Exactly. So it's very hard. But on our part, we're not supposed to do although it comes up to our mind. I agree with you. I think naturally in our mind we have these thoughts that say, this is a fraud, that's a fraud. But as long as we don't know that, we're supposed to help and give.
Manus Friedman, in one of his books, states that you should be careful with a poor person's dignity. Like, if you're going to give money to somebody, you shouldn't say, what are you going to do with it?
You're right. But you're making another point, right? I know, but you're making another point. What Meir is saying is that if someone is collecting either for an organization or for themselves, you're not asking them anything. You're just doubting if it's authentic.
Right.
So that's what he's saying. He's saying, but I'm answering, you know something? I'll tell you the truth. I hope God gives me even though I'm a fraud. So that's why I want to give others also even if they're a fraud.
And always give with a smile.
That's what we just read.
Keep smiling.
But this all pertains to helping Jews. If I donate to breast cancer or anything like that.
So that is something else that I did take out from the Shulchan Aruch, which does say clearly that we do give. It says mipnei darkei shalom, because in order to show how the Torah teaches us peace and Torah teaches us kindness and so on and so forth. So we're supposed to give also what you might want to consider non-Jewish causes. Obviously not Goyish causes, but non-Jewish causes.
Well, breast cancer helps everyone.
Right, but the question over here is if that would be, I don't think it would be considered part of the tzedakah, the amounts that we're talking about here. Even though that it is an idea, it even maybe a mitzvah to do, but it's not considered, the amounts that we're talking here, which is the sort of obligation that we all have, is specifically feeding and helping a fellow Jew. I'm going to have to leave this segment now to go to the next segment. Okay, the next segment, I fitted both the next two segments onto the last page. How to give. In Halakha it also says, and this is where the birth of the tzedakah pushka came from, the tzedakah box, it's the idea of matan b'seiser. Matan b'seiser means I give money, and let's assume that this tzedakah box says on it it's going to poor people. Let's just assume. So I put money in the box, someone comes and takes it, and distributes the money to people in need. I never have to come face to face with the person getting my money. Not because of me, but because of them. They don't have to be ashamed and embarrassed every time they see me to say, oh, this is the guy who's paying for my meals. This is the person who's feeding me. So that idea is a very honorable way of giving tzedakah and a very respectable. You see, Don, this is the point. We're very sensitive to the dignity and to the honor of the person receiving the tzedakah. With this, I want to go to a story from Berdichev. Where Berdichev is now in Ukraine, right?
Yes, it is.
So the city of Berdichev is famous. Number one, it used to have a lot of thousands of Jewish people. And great leaders and scholars. Yep. But there's one man who stands out. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who was the Jewish leader then. He lived, I quoted here, in the turn of the century, going from the 1700s to the 1800s. And he passed away in 1809. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev was very famous for a lot of things. For his number one, his wisdom, his kindness, his tolerance, and how he was able to see good in everybody. The following story is a beautiful story about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. And there's other stories that sound similar, but this is the story that happened with him. That once there was a person in Berdichev who was a very wealthy Jew, but did not have the reputation of giving tzedakah. They all used to call him the miser, like the stingy guy. When he passed away, the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, decided, now we have our chance. We're going to charge this family more than anyone else. Everyone else we charge whatever. This family we're going to charge much more because he never gave tzedakah. And they're able to pay it. So they came to the family. The family said, no, we'll pay like everyone else. We're not paying more. There's no reason why we should pay more. They said, yes, there is. You could afford it. So they said, you know what? Let's go to the rabbi. He said, you know what? Let's go to the. They agreed. They went in front of the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, and they start saying their case. We want to charge him more because they're wealthy. The family says it's not fair. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev stops them and he says, really? Oh, wow. I'm so sorry to hear that he passed away. And let me know when the funeral is. I would really like to go. And by the way, you're not allowed to charge more. They were very shocked. This man is not known to be someone to give tzedakah. Here you have Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who never went to any funerals, really. He went to maybe very important people. The whole day he sat and davened and studied. And now, all of a sudden, whose funeral does he want to go to? Someone who did not have a good reputation. But who did have a good reputation? Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. So when he went to the funeral, everyone went. People closed their stores, schools shut down. They were all there. There was never such an honorable funeral in Berdichev. But there was never also so many confused people in Berdichev. They don't even know why they're there. Why are we here? Because the rabbi's here. Why is the rabbi here? This guy was a lowlife. Yeah, he's a wealthy guy, but he didn't give anybody. A miser. After the Levaya, they go to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, a few people, and they ask him, what's the story here? Why did you go? So he said, I'll tell you the truth. I don't know this man personally. But I met him 3 times, 3 separate occasions. Each time I met him was actually he came before me for a court case, for a din Torah. A court case, a Jewish court. And I was the judge. He happened to win each one of these cases. And these cases taught me how special of a guy this guy was. What's the story? So you ready? We're going to go through 3 court cases. The first one was like this. There was a wine merchant in Berdichev he was like a wholesaler. He would take money from all the retailers of the wine, take a lot of thousands of ruble, travel to a big marketplace, I don't know where, Leipzig or somewhere else, and buy a lot of barrels of wine, bring it back, and give each one of the retailers their barrels of wine so they can now bottle them and sell them. One time he went around, he gathered these thousands of ruble, wrapped it up in a handkerchief, like a red handkerchief, and he's about to go on the wagon to travel to the marketplace, and he realizes he lost it. He starts running back home, looking on the street, can't find it. The whole commotion, he's saying, I lost the money. They're asking, what was it? He tells them it was 3,000 ruble wrapped in a red handkerchief. And they're trying to help him. He realizes he's in big trouble. Because now he doesn't have wine, he doesn't have money, he collapses. They get a doctor, they revive him. The problem is, as soon as he recognizes and remembers his tsaris, he collapses again. The doctor says, listen, this guy's heart is not going to be able to handle it. The whole commotion in the whole city. And a guy walks out of the crowd and says, look what I found. A red handkerchief. They open it up, 3,000 ruble. They revive him, they give it to him. He says, thank you so much, and he goes on his travel. That man was the man who just passed away. A few days later, he gets a knock at the door. Who knocks at his door? Some other guy who says, I'm embarrassed to say, I found the money. I know that the money you gave was not the lost money, because this is the handkerchief and here's the money. I know that you went, got yourself a handkerchief, filled it up with 3,000 ruble and gave it to him as if this was the lost one. I feel very bad. I have such guilt for what I wanted to steal it. So here, I owe it to you. It's yours. So the wealthy miser looks at him and says, I don't even know you. I don't have nothing to do with you. Go away. I'm not taking a cent from you. So he says, what do you mean? I was the one who found it. You're the one who paid it. He says, I don't know you. You found money, gesundheit hate. You can do with it whatever you want. It's not my business. It's not my money. So he brought him to court to say, this guy gave the money. I want to pay him, and he doesn't want to take it. He won the case. He didn't have to take the money. That was the first time I met him, Rabbi Berdichev says. The second time I met him, a little bit of a different case. There's a guy in Berdichev who was, like we say, a shlemazel. Nothing worked out for him. Okay, he tried to be a carpenter, didn't work out. He tried to be a baker, no, it didn't work out. One day he hears about a job in a distant city, and he says, here's where my luck is going to be. Because there was a job that he felt was very much fit to his personality. But he would have to leave his family for quite a few weeks. But what is he going to do? He's going to tell his wife. His wife will never let him leave. So he came to his wife and he made up a story. He told his wife, I have a job that the wealthy miser, you know the miser, he wants I should go. So his wife heard that and said, oh, if so, then the miser probably is going to take care of us while you're on the business trip. He says, yeah, most probably. So he goes on his business trip. First Thursday, he knocks on the miser's door and says, I'm here to collect money. My husband is working for you, and I'm here to collect money for Shabbos. The butler answers the door and starts yelling at her and says, I know what you're talking about. There's no money here for you. Who are you? Who's your husband? And she starts yelling. He starts yelling back. Meanwhile, the miser, the wealthy man, picks up from the commotion what's happening. And he comes to the butler. He says, oh, I forgot to tell you. Give this lady money. Give her. Whenever she comes, just give her money. Every Thursday, she would come knock on the door as if she's coming to collect a paycheck. And she supported her family. A few weeks later, the guy comes back from this far-off city. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's going to see his wife. He's going to, she's going to yell at him. He opens up the door and he sees his wife is smiling. The kids are well-dressed. They're well-fed. There's food in the cupboard. He turns to her. He says, what's the story? She says, what do you mean, what's the story? Exactly as you said. The miser took care of us. Right away, he made a few dollars. He ran to the miser's house, knocked on the door. He said, listen, I appreciate it. Here's the money. I owe it to you. He says, I don't even know you. I don't even know who you are. He says, what do you mean, my wife? He says, I know your wife, but I don't know who you are. I'm not taking any cents from you. So he brought him to court. And the miser won. He's not such a miser anymore, right? And he won because he didn't have to take any cent. The third time was perhaps the most creative. In my opinion, I think it's the most beautiful from all the three. The third time I saw him in court was this story. There's another guy in Berdichev who tried to get a loan from everyone, but nobody gave him because he wasn't a trustworthy person, and he wasn't a person who anyone knew as having the means to pay it back. So he's going around for, let's say, 1,000 ruble loan or something like that, and wherever he goes, everyone tells him no. The wealthy people, everyone tells him no. The last wealthy person he goes to is this miser. He says, everyone turned me down, maybe you'll help me. He says, listen, I'll help you if you get a guarantor to sign in the loan. Someone who's going to guarantee that I'm going to get my money back. He says, guarantee. No one's going to want to guarantee for me. If they're going to guarantee for me, they know they're going to pay. He says, you know what? God will guarantee the loan. He says, okay, no problem. He takes out a piece of paper. He writes a contract. This guy who's taking money thinks it's a joke. He says, giving him 1,000 ruble, pay back in a month, and God is guaranteeing. Sign, gives him 1,000 ruble. He says, whatever, he leaves. He comes back a few months later, all happy that he's able to pay back the loan. He knocks on the wealthy man's house. He says, I have the money for you. He says, what money? He says, what do you mean, the loan? He says, the guarantor paid me back. He said, what do you mean? He says, the guarantor paid you back. It was a joke. I wrote God as a guarantor, but here's the money. He says, no, it wasn't a joke. We have it signed on paper that the guarantor will pay me back, and he took care of me. That's it. Rabbi said this man had a very creative way of giving tzedakah. Okay? No one ever knew him as being someone giving tzedakah. His name wasn't printed anywhere, but he was always giving tzedakah, and everyone knew him as a miser. Okay? So this was the ultimate way of giving tzedakah, and for that, I felt that it was appropriate for me to go to this funeral, to this levaya. One last thing. I know I'm going a little over time, but one last thing. I called it in-laws. Oh, it's not a bad part. Okay. But in-laws, interesting thing. We usually refer to ourselves, and the Torah refers to us as Hashem's children. Correct? How often do you think of us as Hashem's in-laws? As in son-in-law or daughter-in-law? The truth is, in this week's parsha, we have a little bit of a reference to that. Because the first words in this parsha, it says, Vayikhu li Terumah, you should take for me Terumah. The Medrash says, Hashem is basically saying, there's a way you could take me. And that is with, they learned from the word Terumah, Torah. The study of Torah is like a marriage. Let's read it inside. And towards the end of page 8. God said to Israel, I sold you my Torah. I was sold, as it were, together with it. As it is written, and they shall take a contribution to me. They will take me. This may be compared to a king who had an only daughter. Another king came and took her as his wife. Then the latter wanted to return to his country, taking his new wife with him. The father said to him, this daughter whom I gave to you, is the only one I have. I cannot part from her. I also cannot tell you, don't take her, for she is your wife. So please do me the following kindness. Every place that you go, make one chamber for me, so that I can stay with you, for I cannot be separated from my daughter. In the same way, Hashem said to the Jewish people, I have given you the Torah. I cannot part from it. I also cannot tell you, don't take it. So wherever you go, make me a house, so that I will dwell in it. As it is written, and they shall make me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell among them. In other words, like this. What the Medrash is implying, in addition to the building of the Mishkan, is for us, when we study Torah, as it were, I'm saying, as we study Torah, it's as if we're marrying Hashem's daughter. In other words, usually we think of ourselves as Hashem's children. In this case, we're Hashem's son-in-law. And what's the interesting thing here? We have both relationships with Hashem. There's an advantage of being a child, and there's an advantage of being an in-law. The advantage of being a child, I think, is obvious. That it's natural. It's the bond is so, it's inseparable. But the thing is, you know what the disadvantage, if you might say, is that you don't have a choice. You don't choose your relatives, right? No. In other words, you don't even choose your children. In other words, your children are who your children are. The bond is always going to be there, but it's not a bond of choice. It's a bond, innate bond. The advantage of the bond that we have with Hashem through Torah is when we study Torah, we come to appreciate our connection to Hashem, that it becomes something as if like we married, it was our choice. So we have the innate connection to Hashem that's always there and always part of us, but through the study of Torah we become an in-law, which has another advantage. It's an advantage of choice. That the more we study, the more we learn, the more we apply, the more we feel this is what I want. Just like a marriage. It's a choice. And that's what makes it in a way even deeper. So let's summarize what we did today. We had the learning of overview of the Parsha, Parsha's Terumah, starting with the 15 materials. We went to the second segment, which is halachas of tzedakah. I hope it was informative. It was very informative for me to going through these halachas to learn of how the meiser works and so on and so forth, as well as, how could we forget, the motivation of recognizing that ultimately we are all in need of tzedakah from Hashem, and that should always open up our hearts to give others. In the third segment, we learned a story of Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev about a creative way of giving tzedakah, the miser that wasn't. And in the fourth segment, we have now a deeper understanding of how Torah makes us in-laws, while being Jewish makes us children, and they each have their own advantage and two elements in our relationship to Hashem, two dimensions. I would like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's always nice to come together and learn. Look forward to next week in Mirz Hashem. May we come together in gesund and good health, and only for happy and for good occasions.